Today we're going to talk about Ramadan, minimalism, a little bit about the cost of living crisis, and social media and how it plays a role in all of this. So what is minimalism? Minimalism is basically about owning less and living intentionally, especially with the things that you purchase and bring into your life primarily. In layman's terms, I would say it's just about living within your means and not having excess. The main appeal with minimalism is that you will find yourself living a better life because you're going to be living in a space that is less cluttered, easier to maintain, and overall costs a lot less. And then as a result, you find yourself not having as much pressure to keep up with the Joneses because you will be satisfied with what you have. Obviously, oftentimes this concept of minimalism comes from a place of privilege or requires a certain level of privilege to not have to accumulate things. And because of this, a lot of times minimalism is kind of equated to being able to just afford things when you need it at a moment's notice. Now, I think that's a more extreme form of minimalism where people are living in close to empty houses or very few or sparse things, just enough for themselves. And it doesn't take into account that a lot of people come from families or family structures where there's a joint family system or there is a huge emphasis in community and enjoying time with community. Whereas if you don't have that emphasis of community in your life, the way that, for example, brown communities or other communities outside of the Western world have, then you might find it a lot easier than someone that has that pressure or that emphasis in their life towards their community. Now, when it comes to Islam, I actually think there is a little bit of this emphasis towards minimalism or just to live within your means and not live in excess and overabundant lifestyles because of the fact that it's really just not necessary. And it kind of, honestly, the more you have, the more material goods you have, I do think that it kind of makes you dependent on them for validation and to seek prestige and to show off your status and wealth. And I don't think that that aligns with Islam necessarily. It's just about being modest with how you spend your time, your money, and your resources. So what does minimalism and all of this have to do with Ramadan? First, I think it's important to look at what Ramadan is and why we observe Ramadan or the fasting of Ramadan. The importance of Ramadan is not just on fasting, it's also on developing and improving your self and spiritual discipline and our relationship with Allah, and in turn our relationship with the people around us and our broader community that we live in. One of the benefits of fasting during the month of Ramadan and focusing on our Islam and our deen is that we also develop a better understanding of the struggles of the other people in our community that may be less fortunate than us. And I think that indulging in this excess that we tend to do in Ramadan is counterintuitive to the whole point of Ramadan and what we're supposed to be gaining from the experience of Ramadan and fasting. The point of Ramadan is not to decorate our homes and live in excess and have these huge amazing feasts during iftar, because it kind of defeats the purpose by indulging in all this excess after going through this short period of self-discipline during our fast. I think a huge factor for why we're seeing so much of this excess and indulgence is because of the rise of social media and content creators, specifically the Muslim content creators. And I totally understand where they're coming from, and personally I would say that I have always wanted to get to a point where I have like my own space and I can decorate it a little bit for Ramadan. That said, that is not necessary for you to have a successful Ramadan. And I think that when we normalize this so much, I think it starts to be ingrained in us. And the biggest problem it causes is actually the commercialization of Ramadan, which is something I'm so against. The commercialization of religious holidays can, I would argue, have some benefits. However, that's quickly superseded by all of the negatives that come with it. If you look at, for example, Christmas, and oftentimes a lot of people refer to Ramadan or Eid as the Muslims' Christmas, which is a whole issue on its own. But the issue when you look at Christmas, for example, it is a religious holiday that has been commercialized to the point that, to me, growing up, I never thought of it as a religious holiday because it was not ever really treated like that. And I'm not even Christian. And I feel like the people that do practice the faith would probably be low-key offended that it's kind of become a joke and there are people that have nothing to do with the religion or don't care for the religion celebrating it blindly. I can understand why some people might be thinking like it's not that deep, but it kind of is for the people that are actually practicing members of that faith. And I've actually talked to Christians before that do feel like it has taken away from the sanctity of that holiday and the religious importance of it. So personally, I just want to re-emphasize the fact that you do not need to spend hundreds or even $100 or $50 on decorations for your home for Ramadan if you don't have the means to do it. Like, it's fine. I think the rise of all of this happened because people wanted to create like a safe space for themselves within their homes, because a lot of these people, a lot of us Muslims that don't live in predominantly Muslim countries, feel isolated sometimes, and you want to celebrate. That all said, I can still see a lot of benefit for why you would want to do that, especially for the youth. If you're putting up these decorations for Ramadan and it's to get your children excited about Ramadan because you know that they go to school and they're not in a Muslim environment and you want them to be excited about Islam and about different aspects of Islam, I totally get it and I'm totally in support of that. However, I feel like at this point it's an aesthetic and it's just like a vibe, and I can see it, I can understand it. That all said and done, I do still think that we need to take stock of what we're doing and how we're engaging and what we're purchasing and if it's really necessary. As we all know, there is this huge cost of living crisis that has been ongoing for, I would say, a couple of years. Since 2020, it's consistently just gotten worse, and I feel like if we give this impression that you need to have all these decorations to fit in, it'll give a lot of younger people this feeling that they're inadequate when they don't have these things around their house. And it's just not necessary, it's just a nice to have. And I think that's the distinction, that's the education piece that needs to come into play. The reality is just that a lot of people can't afford to spend, you know, any excess money on decorations year after year even. So how can we get around this? Personally, I think there is nothing wrong with having some decorations around your house during Ramadan to bring in that positive energy and the good vibes. There is nothing wrong with that, as long as you're not doing in excess and it's not exorbitant and taking away from the true meaning of Ramadan and fasting. So for myself, for example, I was planning for this year to be the year that I decide to purchase some items to decorate my home for Ramadan. But I don't know if you can see behind me, but alhamdulillah, I have a lot of things. I don't necessarily need to add more clutter in my home. And the second thing is, honestly, like with everything that's been going on with Gaza, personally, I just don't feel right, you know, decorating or spending money in excess for these decorations, because I think it just takes away. So I don't feel personally comfortable doing that right now. However, if you did want to spend money and decorate your home for varying reasons, I would suggest to start small and just get 1 or 2 pieces here and there and try to get things that you can reuse every single year. You don't need to shop every single year for Ramadan and for Eid. You can, if you're smart and you're good about managing your things, you can keep these items for like several years and it won't feel as excessive. As long as you're not feeling like you need to break the bank to have a festive looking Ramadan, I think we're all good. And as long as we're putting the main focus of Ramadan towards getting closer to Allah, improving our relationship with Allah and Islam, then I think we're actually on the right path, and it's fine to have some decorations here and there, just nothing in excess. Not everyone has as much as you may have or I may have, and showing this excessive decoration sometimes, I can understand why it makes other people feel inadequate. It can make me feel inadequate, and I'm not even interested in engaging as much, but it's just something that we need to be a little bit more cognizant of. And if we're able to do that, I think that we can create a more healthier environment around celebrating Ramadan and preparing for Ramadan. And the last point I wanted to make was actually, I think it's better to try to be very careful with our purchases and indulging in purchasing all these things and decorations for Ramadan. Why? Because first of all, okay, there's a couple of things. First, you need to have the space and storage to be able to reuse these items. If you're throwing out most of your items every single year, you're creating a lot of excess waste. When it comes to Ramadan and decorating for Ramadan and making these purchases and having these aesthetic you know, picturescapes or these aesthetic backgrounds for your pictures or videos or just for yourself personally, there's a lot of extra things that come into account. First, you're spending more money on items that aren't necessary and could be used for sadhka. Or the second thing is it takes up space, and you need to have space to store these things adequately so that if you do purchase them, you can use them year after year without having to purchase excessively. The third thing is, and I think it's the most important thing, is every purchase we make makes a difference, especially right now. I think a lot of people are more aware of where their money is going, but we may not think about these things when we're purchasing, you know, a few knickknacks here and there for our home. The less we buy and the more we use what we already have, the better off we'll be and the better off other people will be. I'm not trying to be a party pooper, but I just think that honestly, a lot of us do have things around the house that we can use to decorate. We don't need to buy specifically Ramadan themed decor or specifically brand new things because it's a new year or it's a new decade or a new season of your life. It doesn't have to be the case. And I say this and I totally understand where other people who do choose to make these purchases and decorate their homes in these ways and, you know, make content out of it or whatever. I totally understand that perspective. I just think that with the rise of social media and the ability to influence on a macro and micro scale, every single thing that we choose to show to the world has an impact in a way that we cannot calculate. And so if we can just be more cognizant and honestly make living a more simple life cooler and not weird or not lame or not something to be maybe bullied for, I think it would go a lot further. Yeah, so I think that's what I am trying to say here. So that brings me to the end of my video. Let me know in the comments down below if you're going to be decorating this year or you're going to be skipping out. What are your plans for Ramadan and your goals? Check out my previous videos and I'll see you guys in the next video. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, that was fun.